Trials and Tribulations of Tutankhamun's Mummy. Welcome, Dr. Ikram.
Can you all hear me? Great. Thanks, sweetie. Well, what I'm going to do... Back there, get rid of the light. So what I'm really going to do is actually just introduce Tutankhamun's mummy, talk a little bit about its history, and then lead on to my learned colleagues who have been recently studying it in a variety of ways. So this is more by way of showing you, giving you the past history of the life of Tutankhamun after he had been buried inside his tomb. We know that Tutankhamun is very famous, obviously. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. And the tomb is extremely noted for the disco lighting that it provides us all with, as well as the decoration, which we know has caused some degree of consternation. I'm sure Dr. Reeves will talk about that. And also, of course, mostly for the wonderful things that it contains. The objects are remarkable, and people tend to get involved with all of the objects. They get involved with the gold, the romance of the discovery, and they tend to forget that this tomb was really, this is the whole reason. The tomb was there to keep Tutankhamun safe, to make sure that the body was secure, and to ensure that the king could go safely from this world to the next in order to make the cosmos continue as it ought. Now, Howard Carter was actually very much aware of that, so although he was bedazzled by everything he found, that was not his sole concern. And he knew that he had to think about what to do with the mummy, and he was trying to look ahead and think of non-destructive ways in which to study it. And remember the time period. It is already quite difficult to get X-rays moving to and fro. You heard yesterday from Dr. Hawass how in 2005, even then, moving the wonderful Siemens CT scanner here was a challenge, attendant with, of course, the curse of the pharaohs. And so I think it starts a bit earlier when Carter had decided that he wanted Archibald D. Reed, one of the first radiologists, or one of the pioneering radiologists in England, who also had one of these portable machines. He wanted him to come here to look at Tutankhamun. Unfortunately, Reed died very early in his life, in 1924, from radiation poisoning, which is something that was very common for radiologists. Alhamdulillah, this lot's okay. So finally, Carter said there's nothing much we can do, so we will have to have more of a manual, old-fashioned examination of the body. And there were a few people invited to attend this event, and this was celebrated in many of the newspapers of the day. So on the 11th of November, 1925, at 9:45 a.m., they started. Now, already it had been rather challenging because, of course, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But here we have all the people. Here are our main players, as you can see, with Tutankhamun in the center. The main players who actually really worked on the body were Carter, Lucas, Derry, and Hamdi Bey. And I'm very pleased that in the audience is a descendant of Hamdi Bey, who was one of the, he is over there, and was a good close friend of Howard Carter's. So when Carter was faced with the mummy, he found, or opening the coffins, he found that it wasn't really easy for him to access the mummy in order to look upon the face of Tutankhamun. And it turned out to be really quite complicated because there was this black viscous material that had been coating the body, and I believe it still has not been analyzed, so we will have to call it black goo, being the technical term. But Tutankhamun was covered with this stuff, And Derry finally said, the only way forward is to slice through these bandages. And before that, they'd been trying to put the king in the sun, so he'd heat up. They'd used hot knives, and they were using knives to liberate different parts. And so finally, they got layer upon layer down. And you can see the different things that Carter saw as they were unwrapping the body or cutting open the layers of bandages. And as Dr. Hawass said, what are you going to do? There is no other technology. You cannot melt it off. You can't leave all of this stuff on that poor boy. A, you won't know what it is, which means that you're not going to find anything out. And B, if you do, someone's going to try and rob him blind. So remember, archaeology is destruction. So there was so much gold to remove, and the mask, that Derry records in his notes that the only thing to do was to disarticulate the body, which he did. He records how the body was filled with a lot of packing, and because of the way it had been packed, there was a bulge on the right side of the abdomen that was a bit more pronounced. They also talk about the different positions. You notice that Tutankhamun's arms are a bit lower down. One tends to think of royalty doing this, but this, as a normal position, is not something you really get until the 19th and 20th dynasties. And although the mummy in ancient Egypt says, oh, you can use arm positions to date things, I no longer believe that. So wait for the next version. Tutankhamun was buried with an erect member, and this was in a way evoking, I think, Osiris and the fact that Tutankhamun was focusing on being regenerated as Osiris, while in his life he had been Horus. The whole blackening, that was also looked a bit like combustion. Derry, in fact, remarks upon it and talks about spontaneous combustion, which one actually does see on many mummies because of a quick mummification or differential mummification and changes in humidity and temperature. So ultimately, Tutankhamun was analyzed in bits and pieces, and in a way, you probably got, as Derry remarked, some more detailed information because you could see the epiphyses. So here you can see him, and notice his lovely pierced ears. And I quite like this because you can see the tools that they were using to try and extract the pieces and also to study Tutankhamun himself. You can see that he had finger and toe stalls, he had lots of rings, he had jewelry all the way up his arms, which is perhaps also why the arm positions went, because the weight of the gold was so much. Derry and Hamdi Bey concluded he was 5'4", 166 meters in death about, and probably was a little bit taller in life. He noticed that the lower ends of the femur were unfused, which is what gave them the age, as well as the dentition. And what is quite interesting was the whole thing with the wisdom teeth. And the way that Derry observed this was by looking down here, because they couldn't do an X-ray, which we then get confirmation with later on. Tutankhamun was excerebrated, which they could establish. He was eviscerated, but this was very strange. Generally, when we are eviscerated, it's here or here. But this cut was very different. And his heart was missing as well, unless it had just desiccated and turned into a molten mush that we can't really differentiate it, though I think that the CT scans would have revealed some sort of muscle like that. Carter left the bead collar in position. You can see that it's just bits and pieces of faience beads, with some of the teardrops perhaps being more worthwhile or notable. And after the study, notes were written up. Salah Bey Hamdi was supposed to make a lot of reports and popularize this find and disseminate the information in the Arabic press. We have a letter from Carter to that effect. And while Derry was supposed to be working more on the slightly drier version to be published at some point. Now, Carter, I thank Tom Hardwick for this reference. From the High Commission, there's a memo saying that Carter did not want Tutankhamun, if possible, to leave his tomb. So they carefully re-articulated him, covered him up, tied him up, and Burton took the final photos. And Tutankhamun rested, we think, tranquilly in his tomb until Harrison of the University of Liverpool decided, together with his former student Ali Abdullah, to do some work. He was professor at Cairo University, to work on the body of Tutankhamun. They'd already done some work on the other royal mummies. And so this is them trundling off to the Valley of the Kings with Ali Abdullah as the leader, with Anne Harrison, Linton Reeves, who was a photographer, Frank Leake, who was a dentist and who'd worked extensively in Egypt, plus, of course, the team from here. This is quite nice because we've got the letter of permission, and you can tell, it's one of the 1968 with the nicely typed up things. And Zaki Iskandar was the scientific director of the Antiquity Service, and Mohammed Saleh, who later became the museum director in Cairo, was also, I believe, a young inspector at the time. The machine came from Cairo, and work lasted from the 4th to the 6th of December. The tomb was not closed to the general public, so as ever, there was a momentary, some amount of hysteria going on. Excuse some of these images because they are taken from film that the BBC made. We are all familiar with documentaries, right? Well, this is one of the first documentaries made in color by the BBC of Tutankhamun. And so you see bits and pieces happening here. Iskandar working with Harrison's team, and they were unwrapping the mummy. And then you will see, like Dr. Zahi saw, the card with, who had worked on this mummy and the dates of opening and closing. So Harrison was also working in tandem in terms of the research with Dr. Batrawi in Kasralaini, and you can see some of the work going on here. So they did a study which involved X-rays because they brought the machine here, and then you've got this lovely silsila talking about who did what when. And this is, some of the press that covered it, because whenever Tutankhamun's doing something, he is always in the press. Now, it's interesting because when the photographs we have, Tutankhamun was not looking as beautifully articulated as he had in the Carter picture. But of course, even then, when you batten someone down and put them into a coffin, there's a certain amount of movement putting it in and taking it out. But there seems to be quite a bit here. And also, we seem to be missing that broad bead collar and a few other bits and bobs. A lot of work was being done on the cranial features, and you can see there Tutankhamun's being measured with a very nice tape measure. Then notice the lesion on his face, which of course everyone said, Lord Carnarvon had that, that's where the mosquito bit him, so of course there was a lot more curse stuff going on. Now what's interesting is Leake had worked with the team, and he trying to do a new way of X-raying using radioisotopes, and that involved a 4-hour exposure. What you had to do was, though, get behind here and put a plate in. And in the end, he was unable to do that, so he managed to, through the cut that had been made by Derry and Hamdi Bey, he actually tried to get an image of the teeth, which did not work out very well, but it was interesting to see that even at this time, new pioneering aspects of scientific inquiry were being used. Now here they found out the fact that Tutankhamun had the one resin level here and the other one here, so it speaks to two different lots of resonation. And he was very well stuffed, as has already been noted by Derry. You notice there is an absence of some of the rib fragments and the collar, which some scholars believe might have vanished between the wars, the Second World War, when there were a lot of people running around doing things they probably should not have done. There also was samples were taken and a serological test was carried out in an effort to try, even then, try to establish relationships scientifically amongst members of the royal family and the different mummies that we had. So you can see there's a lot of things being covered in the press, and of course, as usual, my apologies to the journalists, but you often get things wrong. Talking about, the sugar box, and you think, what sugar box? His head was right there. So, alhamdulillah. They did notice things that Carter had missed, interestingly, little pieces of inscribed silver from the tenons, which had the king's name on it, so such an eye for detail by the ancient Egyptians. Naturally, as I said, the curse comes up, and here we have Dr. Zaki Iskandar working on the mummy. He died quite young. Now, when they were moving the glass on top of the sarcophagus, it broke, and Pilkington's glass in England said, "Oh, that's terrible. We will send special extra heavy glass over." And we have a very nice thing of Pilkington being appointment to King Tutankhamun. So they sold a lot of glass off of that, I'm sure. But that was a glass that we had on the tomb for a long time. Now, Harrison's findings were published in a series of articles, but a bigger manuscript never came to light because his editor said, "Oh, Tutankhamun's a bit boring. I don't think anyone wants to read another book about him." You've heard Marianne's lecture this morning, so that's obviously not true. But anyway, so his manuscript languishes unpublished, and that's perhaps for the best, having read a part of it. But anyway, but Harrison's work, the hard scientific work, was published indeed. However, Leake, who was with him, managed to gather together the notes that he had taken with Harrison, and also he was given access to the notes that Derry had taken together, perhaps with Hamdi Bey, who wrote that all down, slightly unclear. And this came out in the Tutankhamun tomb series that Cisco talked about earlier, where you have the human remains. It's a slim volume. It quotes extensively from people's diaries and so forth. And that was really what we have as our mainstay, apart from the appendix in the Carter volumes. Now, Dr. Iskandar, Zaki Iskandar, this was not his only interaction with Tutankhamun. Very shortly, hard on the heels of Harrison, we have Harris from University of Michigan, also a dentist. Tutankhamun seems to have attracted dentists for some reason. Must be his teeth. Anyway, so they started to do some work, and they were doing x-rays of the royal mummies, but the focus was the skulls and dentition. And so he came, got permission to do some work, and they too traipsed into the Valley of the Kings, and you see Jim Harris grinning away, very happy to have access. And again, like the last time, this time too, the conservators took an opportunity to work on the materials to make them all lovely. And here we have Dr. Zaki Iskandar checking the notes of who had gone there before. And I would like a picture of you so I can juxtapose them, please. So you can see that over here, Tutankhamun is even more in a mangly state because he's been taken in and put down and taken in, put down. Not so good. A lot of the focus, as you can see, is on these machines here. And the focus was really, as I said, on the head. So where the dentition was being studied, the form of the head, skull was being studied in a hope to better understand and maybe also just morphologically get an examination in craniometrics of this particular body. In 2000, there was an attempt made to do some DNA on Tutankhamun, but this was stopped at midnight. And then it was not until 2005 where we have Dr. Hawass and his team, and you can see that the poor boy is not looking so good here either, working to be CT scanned, and this is what you're going to be hearing about in the next lot of lectures. But you can see here quite clearly the packing, the pronounced overbite, and so forth. Fracture in the femur they reported on, which already Derry had mentioned. And in fact, a lot of the things about, details about his height and age were pretty much in keeping what Derry had said. So alhamdulillah, even in 24, 25, people were getting their physical anthropology right. So you can see these other images, which of course with CT one learns so much more as well. Another aspect was, again, as mentioned in yesterday's lecture, using the CT data, there was trying to do a lot of reconstruction of the face. And it's quite interesting because, of course, what happens is our own biases come through. So you can see the variety of, bold or French or what have you, kind of variations, with a lot of people favoring this one. So DNA was also being carried out. The most recent work, Dr. Gad published in 2020, which you can see here. And many diagnoses about Tutankhamun's health, causes for his death, have been published. Up to 2014, Frank Rulli and I had a good grip on all of them. And now I think there might be some that have passed by us, which are not recorded. But you can see that everything is mentioned. Except for flu, which I favor that. It doesn't always have to be drama. But I mean, as you saw from the reconstructions, what was Tutankhamun like? Because that's the other thing. What was he like? Because he's such a sickly person, they say. Was he sickly, or was this stylization? Because you see, he's sitting down and drawing his bow and arrow. Ooh, he couldn't walk, I'm sure. Terrible. But you look at the poses. He's following the style of his ancestors. So one should take that into consideration. And I thank Ray Johnson for Akhenaten in a similar pose. So I am just putting it out there. I am not making a statement one way or the other. Now, Andre Veldmeyer has looked at the shoes, and he and I have looked at the multitude of sticks in Tutankhamun's tomb. Having many sticks in a tomb is pretty normal, especially if you're a king. If men and women of elite rank had lots of sticks. Please see the article by Nicholas Brown in Chassis about this as well. Sticks do not necessarily mean infirmity. Now, I have had to use a stick for several years, and I looked very carefully at my wear patterns to compare what I saw with Tutankhamun's. And I have to say, I don't think that he was really using them because he needed to hobble along. I am against this hobbling. Of course, they might say something else. So we also have all of these images, but of course, that could be a royal trope. The king smites enemies. The king is a great hunter. The king was going out to battle. Again, it's a trope. But also, Horemheb was an army general. Who was he fighting for? He was leading people in battle. Was the king there, maybe, just to urge them along? If so, maybe the king wasn't as much of a weakling, walking like this. Whoops. As one might think. So, I mean, I am just putting that forward. We also have the number of weapons in a tomb. Again, we do not have another parallel tomb, so how can we say anything? And some of them, of course, are also there in terms of ritual objects that you see occurring in some of the funerary texts that the king needs. Okay, he didn't use that much, it was pretty. But we also had the cuirass, right? This is a leather cuirass. It is not the goldy corselet. This is something that someone going into battle would use. So, why would he have that there if he never, ever went into battle? I would just like you to think about that. So, lovely text. He found great companies of the wild animals of the desert, and he captured them in a little moment. So, as this is what a king does, but maybe it was also what this king did. So, we have this version of Tutankhamun. I would like to point out the loincloth is not properly tied. Or we have that version of Tutankhamun, thanks to Bianca von Sittert. This is, Pardon?
He has no pants on.
No, he doesn't. He's wearing a miniskirt. You can't see his underwear, it's underneath. It goes down to here, Betsy. It's a mini. He probably had leggings, actually. So we don't know, because, I mean, even though we have some of the high-level kind of scientific tools available to us, even so, And you will see that they're scholars. You know, humanities people think, ooh, science, that's the answer. But we will see that science is not always just the answer, because when you get sick, go for a second and third opinion to a doctor. So I would like to say that Tutankhamun still has many things to tell us, and maybe we can have one moment of silence to salute Tutankhamun, Howard Carter, his entire team, and Lord Carnarvon. And thank you very much.
Of the
68.
expedition? 78.
68.
No,
Harrison is 68.
68, I'm sorry. One of the members of the expedition took samples from the mummy.
I thought he took it from 55.
No.
The thing that Frank
No,
brought
no,
back
no, no.
was
It is from the mummy of Tutankhamun.
I mentioned that. Connolly.
And it is published by someone in England that Tutankhamun was burned. But Frank Rowley brought these pieces back to
Same
Egypt.
one or different one? Because this is the stuff was taken for Connolly when he did the serological tests. And so this was an extra part from the Connolly sampling.
But these pieces were taken illegally out of Egypt. They did not have any permission to take it out. The other thing, Dr. Ashraf is here. As far as I remember, the heart, the CT scan showed the heart of the mummy or not? Okay, thank you.
I was just going by there.
No, thank you
I'm
very
done now.
much. Thank you. And now we're going to